Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We discussed his book, very interesting book, very important and very current book, White Shift, Populism, Immigration, and the Future of White Majorities. That was on July 15th, 2021. His name is Dr. Eric Kaufmann with two N's. But we're going to go back to an earlier book that he wrote in 2010. That title of this book that we're going to discuss is Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth? Demography and Politics in the 21st Century. And Dr. Kaufmann is the professor of politics at Birkbeck College at the University of London. And he has also written other books. One is Changing Places. Another is Rise and Fall of Anglo-America. And he can be found on Twitter at EPKAUFM. And his website is www.sneps.net, SNEPS.net. So, Dr. Kaufmann, are you there?
I sure am. Great to be here, William.
Awesome. Well, thanks for returning to talk about this book. Really fascinating book. I think you're probably right that it's surprising to think that fundamentalism is going to end up ruling the world. Can you talk a little bit about your background and what led you to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I guess I got interested in population shifts more in relation to issues around national identity and immigration, more of the variety of what I wrote about in my recent book, White Shift, which is sort of my main academic background is in this area. But I sort of detoured to look at religion because I was interested to look at the relationship between religiosity and birth rates and fertility, which in turn then shapes population level changes, right? Because in a way, the key to now that I won't say conquered mortality. We've obviously still got a pandemic and we have some people, but by and large, mortality differences between societies isn't what's driving population shift. It's much more to do with differences in birth rates. And those actually, as we're finding, are increasingly shaped by religiosity and theology. And so I was just sort of wanting to think through, okay, if we were going to spin this ahead, multiple generations, what does this say for the future of a planet in which much of the planet is got below replacement birth rates? And that's East Asia. It's not just East Asia and Europe, but includes North America now, and also increasingly Latin America. So we have a large part of the world now that is not replacing itself in a way. And so the question is, who are tomorrow's people? And this is a question, by the way, that my friend Paul Moreland is asking in his book, Tomorrow's People. Who are going to be the people who populate the planet in the future? And I guess I came to the view that the religious are going to play a very important part looking long term, simply because of this growing connection between population growth and religiosity, with the secular, non-religious having a below replacement fertility.
And so can you describe what the kind of defines secularization and why people who tend to be more secular tend to not have as many children?
Yeah, I mean, there are two definitions of secularism. I mean, one is separation of church and state, if you like, which is more political definition. But the second one is, which Steve Bruce, who's a writer, who's a very interesting writer, talks about, is that people just simply becoming less religious, believing less, affiliating less, no longer marking the Christian or Jewish box, and instead marking the no religion box on the in a survey. So, for example, I think that's really what I mean by secularization, is that second individual level meaning of the term.
And so you have this, like, there is the West secularized after World War II, but there's also this kind of return to fundamentalism in places all over the globe. Can you talk about the problems with secularization and why fundamentalism is a response?
Yeah, so I think it's generally recognized in the academic literature that fundamentalism is in some way at least a response to secularism. And in fact, if we look at the trends in religious affiliation, the stricter religions, the more, if you like, fundamentalist religions are doing better. I mean, even in Western countries. So, for example, Pentecostalists, evangelicals in the United States, their church membership is going to hold up a lot better than that of the more liberal mainline denominations, let us say the Episcopalians, or in Britain the Anglicans, or perhaps the traditional church like the Catholics in Spain. So all of those the church memberships you just get by virtue of being born, you get through birth, membership in a culture, that kind of religion is more likely to decline. People are going to switch to being non-religious, whereas the ones that involve a very strict religiosity, that could be ultra-Orthodox Judaism, it could be Salafi Islam, it could be evangelical Christianity. Those are going to do better. And so what you're getting is a hollowing out of the middle. You're getting people either going non-religious or going very strict religious. And that seems to be the master trend that we're seeing in the West. Now, and of course, you've got the non-Western world where there's very little secularization and religious decline. If you look at India, yes, it's become more developed and wealthier. China, it's become more developed and wealthier. Religion has either risen or it has remained where it was. So outside of the Americas and Europe, you don't really see this religious decline much, if at all. And then, of course, you've also seen religious revival in the Muslim world, the Islamic revival since 1970, and the Pentecostal revival, which has involved different parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, and so on.
Right, and there is a correlation between wealth and birth rates, correct?
Yes, there is a correlation, but it is by far, it's much more complicated than that. So a country can become wealthier. I mean, if you take the Gulf Arab states, some of the richest countries in the world, you don't see secularization there. So income per se is not really going to explain that much. By the way, the other thing is birth rates. Birth rates usually go down with GDP per capita, but again, there's a lot of variation. So again, some of those wealthy Gulf states would have not high birth rates, actually. I mean, the birth rates have come down there, but it's not. There's a lot of variation within rich countries.
Gotcha. So there is some kind of correlation, but I mean, this is very important because you refer to these demographics that are going to change inevitably as really kind of a hidden hand of history. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So a lot of people who study history and they study sort of where society is going, and they'll look at what's going on with new technologies and maybe new cultural ideas, new political ideas, but they don't pay as much attention as I think they should to these slower changing, less glamorous, but ultimately very consequential demographic changes. Especially if you look over multiple generations, even a relatively modest difference in birth rates, if compounded over multiple generations, can lead to a massive change. And there's a book called The Rise of Christianity that says, in the year 30 AD, there was maybe 40 Christians in the Roman Empire, and with a fixed rate of expansion based upon taking better care of their sick. I mean, this is Rodney Stark's point. I mean, he says that with a steady growth rate due to taking better care of the sick, having more female converts and somewhat higher birth rate than other Romans, by the time you get to the year 300, which is when Christianity is instituted as the official religion of the Roman Empire, there are 6 million Christians. We can see something of this pattern of demographic advantage multiplied over generations also in the growth of the Mormons, in the growth of the evangelical Protestants in the United States. There was a paper that showed that was 3/4 birth rate advantage, not large-scale conversion from mainline to evangelical denomination. So those are just a few examples, really, of where this demographic advantage, if sustained over generations, does lead to really quite substantial shifts. And in the case of the evangelicals, they went from something like under 40% to 2/3 of the of white Protestantism in America between the early and late 20th century. So several generations maintaining a one-child advantage was enough to really change the composition. And so these compositional changes are really important.
And that you use that term endogenous growth sects. So like they're expanding through procreation, not necessarily as much as evangelization.
Right. Yeah.
And so sorry,
yeah, go
please
ahead.
continue. No, you go.
Well, no, just to say that, yeah, so I do then focus on some of these, what I call endogenous growth sects. And this is a kind of model for a religious denomination where you don't focus on converting anybody. You focus on two things: high birth rates and retaining the children in the community. And groups like the Amish and Hutterites and the ultra-Orthodox Jews, or to some degree, the Orthodox Calvinists of the Netherlands. So these groups then are able to maintain some of the fastest, consistent year-on-year growth rates of any religious denomination, while other religious movements flare up and then fade away. And the ones that are based on this model seem to be very successful in maintaining these growth rates for long periods. The Amish have maintained this doubling time in sort of 30 years or so. They've done that for a century or more. If they keep that up for another century, by the time we're into the 2200s, there are going to be 300 million Amish. I mean, if they maintain that, and they have maintained that rate for a century. Now, something could change, of course, it's possible. But all I'm saying is that if you maintain these kinds of rates and you maintain them generation after generation, Pennsylvania Dutch and Yiddish are amongst the fastest growing languages in the United States, not because a lot of new speakers are coming on board. It's all through demography. So it's important to pay attention to the way demography can change society, even at the aggregate level. And Israel is really the paradigm case for this, with the very, very rapid expansion of the ultra-Orthodox. If you take the share of the Jewish first graders in the 1960s, it was maybe a few percentage ultra-Orthodox. It's now a third. And then, of course, when they're adults, right? Now, of course, there's going to be some leakage to the mainstream, but it's still pretty low. Because if you leave the ultra-Orthodox, you leave your family, you leave everything you know. It's a much bigger step. So retention is high, birth rate's very high, and so the share of the population increases rapidly.
And I think that it's an interesting way to look at all these groups, how the growth of the Amish, the growth of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox will change the demographics, but also the culture among the people that they change. I mean, it's hard. It's like, think about Israel. I think you said eventually 70% of Israel will be ultra-Orthodox. Like, that is an incredible cultural change as well. Can you talk or expand more about how this will change culture?
Yeah, so if you look at Israel at the population level, Israel as a whole, what you can see is that Israel has shifted culturally to the right to become a much more religious country. It was conceived of as a sort of almost secular Zionist society by the labor Zionist pioneers who actually broke with Judaism to some degree. Judaism, which was critical of this idea of incarnating the promised land in the here and now. They believe the promised land should only exist in the kind of hereafter, but bringing this vision of making Israel the territory of Israel, that Zionist vision was originally seen as a heresy by religious Judaism. So originally, Israel was conceived as a relatively secular project, and they kind of didn't think what was then the ultra-Orthodox, they thought of as just this relic that was just going to fade away. But of course, they then start to self-segregate, and they start to have these large families and retain the children and create this scholar society where the men remain at yeshiva and they aren't working, and women are encouraged, essentially their worth is to some degree premised on how many children they have. So you get this new society forming, and then you've got, modern Orthodox, which is, a very different kind of group, but still has some elements of that Haredi religiosity, and they've got intermediate level birth rates. So between the two of them, they really do shift the character of Israel. And so you can see that Israel's moving in that direction of being more conservative and more religious over time, a very opposite trajectory to, for example, what we see in the United States or in European countries. And so people who assume that the inevitable trajectory is towards secularism and liberalism, need to, I think, understand that in Israel, the demography has made a big difference. Now, that demography also made a difference in America with the rise of the religious right, which is a significantly demographic phenomenon too. And I think looking ahead in the United States, the rise of, the Mormons, but the Amish, some of these groups looking way ahead are going to have more of an impact and we'll start to see, arguably, if this continues, we could start to see the United States, not this century, but probably the century after, move in the same direction as Israel. Right?
Israel, yeah. Can you talk? I never had heard this term, the quiverful, and this kind of concept of fertility in the fundamentals. Can you expand upon that?
Well, yeah. So you have there is a movement, a sort of neo-Calvinist Protestant fundamentalist movement called Quiverful, who have a very pronatalist theological, belief system. So they are in many ways a new phenomenon. So they don't have the historical roots that the Amish and the Hutterites and the ultra-Orthodox have. But their theology has many similarities. And so if they are coalescing as yet another one of these endogenous growth sects through retention of children and through high birth rates. So their view is that they look at passages in the Bible that encourage fecundity, and that, blessed is he who has a full quiver of children. If given that that's their focus, and the women are, into the same kind of things that the Haredi women are into, that is God favoring me by giving me many children? The number of children I have is the degree to which God is favoring me. Those who can't have children, they believe this is a catastrophe because it means they haven't been chosen. So there is this kind of Calvinist predestination kind of approach to theology, but it's very much tied in with this idea of reproduction, and that ultimately those who reproduce will inherit the earth.
Right. That's like that in Mormonism. In Mormonism, the more kids you have, the more spirits you're incarnating, and so you're creating kind of like your own little kingdom too. So it's it's pro fecundity, right?
Right, explicitly so, and that's what's interesting. And so I think now with the Mormons, we do see. There are people who are arguing that in fact you're seeing more apostasy and decline. A lot of the data that we see just seems to show that wherever the American fertility trend goes, the Mormon trend is a little under twice as high as whatever is going on in the mainstream society. And I haven't seen data yet that would contradict that. So, despite these reports of large-scale defections and secularization, and especially when we look at the heartland areas of Utah and overspill into Nevada and Idaho. And so the question then is, well, in that heartland of Mormonism, are we seeing secularization? And I think the data isn't there to contest that yet. The Mormons are, of course, the most modernized of these groups, and they participate very heavily in mainstream society, which would make them more susceptible to being to the forces of secularization. So I'd say the jury's still out on what's going to happen there.
Right, much different than the Amish, who are totally, or even the Haredi. My understanding is that they're very insular as well, even in Israel. Maybe we can talk to something I don't really know. What's your kind of view on the kind of demographic view of the continued expansion of Islam and how that will affect our world?
Well, so Islam actually, there has been a decline in the Arab world, the Arab part of Islam, which is kind of the core area for Islamic trends, has seen a substantial fertility decline. More so in North Africa and the Gulf Arab states than in, say, Egypt. So it depends on the country, but there has definitely been a substantial drop in birth rates in the Arab world. And also some of the large Muslim countries, Indonesia and India, have also got lower birth rates as well. So I think that the sort of very rapid growth in the share of the world's population, I think from something like 12.5% to 25% between let's say 1950 and 2050, that sort of time period. I mean, I think that it's not going to go much above the 25% of the globe. So I don't think we're going to see this demographically surging Islam. I think that in certain European countries too, you can see those Muslim birth rates have come down a fair bit. Sorry, just ignore that.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry. But
Don't
yeah,
worry about it. My cats are bothering me.
okay. So yeah, I think that is the trajectory in European countries. I think you're going to see an expansion of the Muslim share up until 2050, but I don't think you're going to have. We're not on track to see a majority Muslim Europe in Western Europe. I think the numbers are going to kind of settle out at around, in the most Muslim countries, Sweden, Britain, Netherlands, France. It's looking like 2060. It's sort of around 15 to 20%. Up from numbers like 5 to 8%. So there is going to be a significant growth, but I don't think it's going to be leading towards majority Muslim Western Europe. Would be my view on that. And then just thinking more broadly, also, I mean, immigration. What you see with immigration is that people are not just coming from developing parts of the world that are not white and Christian to white Christian or white secular societies. So there is an ethnicity or an ethnic change that immigration brings. But what people lose sight of is on the back of ethnic difference comes religiosity. And so it's also a migration of religious people to secular societies. London, any immigration gateway city in Europe, generally will be more religious than the hinterland. London is the most religious part of the United Kingdom. Why? Well, if you look in the churches, they are majority immigrant or non-white. And so there's been a kind of revitalization of Christianity through African and to some degree East European immigration. And so that's part of the story as well, is that you can see demography resisting secularization in these gateway immigration cities, where the religious immigrants are moving into a secular society and keeping religion, and eventually that will lead to an increase in religiosity, because the children of the immigrants don't really become non-religious unless they're Christian immigrants. But even there, I mean, African Christian immigrants are less likely to lose their religion. Their children are much less likely to become secular than, let us say, white East European Christian immigrants or even Afro-Caribbean Christian immigrants. And then, of course, you look at the non-European groups, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, there's very limited religious loss in the second generation. So you've got immigration of religious people, retention of religion in the second generation, and that actually leads to a kind of demographically induced return of religion as well. And so this is another factor in the return of religion to Europe, is this immigrant-led religiosity.
Right. So just because there's immigration or ethnic differences doesn't mean that there's more. It's the opposite. You're not getting secularization. You're getting
quite the reverse. In fact,
yeah.
the ethnic difference protects the religion from decline, because being Muslim is it's seen as kind of cool amongst the young generation, that it's an identity statement if you're Bangladeshi or Pakistani to say, I'm a Muslim. It's not some sort of fusty old thing your parents or grandparents did, and with old people in the pews, which is one of the reasons why Christianity is seen as quite uncool amongst, say, European youth, certainly mainline Christianity. Whereas if you're ethnic minority, then your minority ethnicity and that difference protects your religion as well from secularism. And so for both of those reasons, I think we should expect religion to return in some sense in Europe.
It's really fascinating. And do you find among the Muslims that the tradition of 4 wives, when they move into, say, Europe or the US, is that tradition declining? Because if you're stating that the Muslim demographics are not increasing, is that because that kind of tradition of 4 wives is in decline?
Well, there's only ever a small number that do maintain that here in Europe. It's only, a subset that now, of course, it's a significant subset who, for example, engage in cousin marriage, in arranged marriage, and so on. Particularly, a significant portion of the Pakistani and Bangladeshi population in Britain that come from rural, very traditional regions of their home countries and maintain these cousin marriages and those links. So there's where you would find, I think, some of the things you're talking about, although I'm not aware of the four wives. I don't think there's much polygamy. I mean, I think it's mainly a question of having very traditional gender roles and attitudes. I think that's more of the kind of thing that one sees. But there is a spectrum. I mean, amongst the Muslim population, you have some that are more modern and liberal type of Muslims, and their Islam might be more surface. They might be more likely to intermarry. Once you get intermarriage, that's when you get some secularization. So the offspring of a Muslim, non-Muslim marriage would be much more likely to shift to saying they have no religion than anyone whose both parents are Muslim. And it's interesting. You can sort of get a sense of this partly through the British census, which has a question on religious affiliation. I mean, the number of people who said they were Muslim in the 2001 census but said no religion in the 2011 census is really small. I mean, it's kind of like on the order of maybe 1% or at most 2%. So it's very, very limited change. But the direction of travel is ever so slightly in that direction of religious loss, even amongst Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs. But it's just very slow.
So do you believe that in the West, in the UK or the US or Europe, do you think that secularization is going to be predominant, or a more larger return to religiosity or even fundamentalism? What do you think? How do you think that will turn out?
Well, yeah, I think we have to distinguish between the near term, like the period from now until 2050, and then the longer term, which is post 2050. And I guess my view on the near term is, if you take Europe, particularly Catholic Europe, you're going to see continued religious decline, secularization. In the US as well, I would say that would be the master trend up until about 2050 or thereabouts, which is when some of these demographic factors, which in the case of the US and Europe is mainly going to consist of immigrant religiosity, immigrants bringing religion in to a more secular environment. I mean, that will be the main driver of the demographic return of religion. The other driver will be very low birth rates amongst the unaffiliated non-religious population, which is generally, I mean, those birth rates are running anywhere from about 1 to 1.5 children per woman. I mean, there was a study in France that showed about a half-child advantage between somebody who said they had no religion, white French women who say they have no religion versus white French women who say they are Catholic, was a half-child advantage. In other cases, it's only a quarter child, but those advantages do start to add up over generations. So I would say, and also the fact that you tend to get rapid religious decline early in the secularization cycle when people start to leave religion in large numbers. That's happening in the US, happened in Protestant Europe, like Lutheran countries, Britain, etc. It happened earlier in the Protestant countries. It's now happening in Spain and Italy and so on, in the Catholic countries, Ireland. So that's where we no longer see religious decline really in the Protestant countries of Northern Europe. But we are seeing continued decline in Catholic countries. But at some point that flattens out. At some point, the people who are going to leave and who are only Catholic because it was the thing you did socially, they're all gone, and it's down to that core of believers. Once that happens, the decline flattens out, and that's what's happened in Germany, Scandinavia. Then from then on, I think the demography becomes more important. And so I would have thought in Northern Europe, you're going to start to see the return of religion sooner than in Southern Europe, where secularization still has some years to run, and the US too. I think the secularization is still new, and it's going to run for some decades, but then eventually it plateaus, and then the demography, I think, will kick in. Longer term, the demography, I think, is going to be the most important thing. In the short run, I think switching out of religion will be more important.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting if we lived another 100 years. You're saying the whole structure of these societies due to demography I mean, even the short term here in the U.S., I'm 52. Just due to migration, the demography has changed rapidly. So a lot of these things will be different in 100 years. Really interesting book. Congratulations. Where's the best place for people to actually, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap this up?
No, really. I mean, I think, some people have said, where does it end? And I wrote this book, and it was, back in 2008, 2010, 11. Some people said, well, is it simply the case that these endogenous sects will just take over, and what will stop them, right? So what might lead to the Haredim not taking over in Israel? And I think one of the things that we see in an authoritarian society like China, the Chinese will tell the Uyghurs how many kids they're allowed to have. In an authoritarian society, there isn't an advantage really to being a high fertility sect, because the state can simply come in and tell you how many kids you're allowed to have. Now, so that is, I wouldn't say China will be taken over by fundamentalist religiosity. Israel, the question is going to come down to how liberal a society is. A liberal, multicultural society, that is the ideal environment for strong religion to take over. Whereas the authoritarian environment is much less friendly. And in fact, you could argue it's the reverse. So a lot depends on what happens to the political mainstream culture in these societies, right? And whether they're willing to intervene in the processes that are leading to these groups to expand.
Right. And I think that Putin got involved in their demographics. They said they weren't having enough kids. So he was doing all kinds of stuff to try to increase the fertility rate. So you might see those types of things in different parts of the world, so it'll be very interesting. And where's the best place for people to obtain your book, Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the only way you can probably get it now is online and through. I mean, I don't know if it's still listed on Amazon.
It is. I just bought it, so I got it.
Oh, good. Okay, fine. Because someone had told me that it's out of print. I can't remember if it is, but yeah.
Then Kindle. I got the Kindle.
I would say go to Amazon, or you have to probably get it from a used bookstore or on Amazon or electronically at this point.
And the best place if somebody wants to reach out or contact you is your website, sneps.net. Is that correct?
Yeah, either you can do it either through Twitter or through I have my email, which you should be able to find either at my Snaps website or just Googling me. You should be able to get that.
Gotcha. And it's Kaufmann with two N's. It
is indeed.
Kaufmann. Dr. Eric Kaufmann. Title of the book again is Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth? Demography and Politics in the 21st Century. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, William. Thanks for having me.
All right, bye-bye. All right. You can, hold on. All right, so that